What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're going to be talking about the T5S2 Invitational, which is going on right now over on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/TacticalTortoiseTV. What I want to do today is talk a little bit about the Invitational so far and go over the top 8 finalist lists for the elimination stage, which is currently ongoing and will be concluding on Sunday with the grand finals. We'll be streaming games all weekend if you want to head over to the Twitch channel. And if you haven't caught any of the games so far, you can catch the replays over on the replay channel. There'll be a link to that down in the video description. First off, we're right here on the TTS40k.com website. This is the website for the T5S2 Global Online Tournament Circuit. If you don't know anything about this, this is a tournament circuit that I run, the Tactical Tortoise Tabletop Simulator Tournament Series. That's the 5 T's and the 2 S's. That's where that comes from. And I run a lot of events for this series over on the Discord channel. There'll be a link down below in the video description to Discord as well. So if you want to play some online 40k, you can visit us over there. But in addition, we also accept results to the series from all sorts of other external events. So if you have almost any online Warhammer 40k event is eligible to submit to the series. And you can see that we have a ton of players from all sorts of events, not only in the Discord server, but also worldwide, external to the server as well. Over 600 people. So if you're interested in becoming involved, you can check us out at tts40k.com or visit us in the Discord. But right now, I want to talk to you about the Season 3 Invitational. How the series works is that we will compile all of the scores throughout a 6-month season, and then at the end of that, the top 16 players will receive an invite to the Invitational. This season, we ran through a group stage. So we had some phenomenal players from around the world participating in the group stage, and a pretty diverse metagame. We have a lot of Adepta Sororitas, a lot of Iron Hands, actually, which is one of the highest performing, at least in the online circuit, Space Marine chapters, as well as a couple Drukhari and a couple Adeptus Mechanicus, as well as Mixed Imperium. Those players each play each other in their group until only 2 players remain, so they'll play 3 games, basically round-robining everyone in the group. The players with the highest results, the highest scores, will end up advancing to the group stage. And this time around, we actually had one 3-0 player who won all their games from their group, and then one 2-1 player in each of the groups as well. So all of the 2-1s or better ended up qualifying for the elimination stage. And then the elimination stage gets broken up into brackets. We have the quarterfinals happening right now today on Friday, July 9th. The players that win their quarterfinals games will qualify for the semifinals, and then those will obviously qualify into the grand finals on Sunday, July 11th, which is going to be super exciting. We're going to have the top 2 best players in the world for Virtual 40k fighting it out to be the number 1. So again, to reiterate, all of that stuff is going down on the Twitch channel, twitch.tv/TacticalTortoiseTV, and all the replays will be going up to the Tactical Tortoise TV replay channel, so I hope you end up going over there to check that out. But what I want to do today is also talking about the composition of these top 8. Interestingly, we have a pretty even split of the newest codexes. Now, one thing that did happen, which is, I think, a little bit odd, some kind of RNG occurring in these group stage games, is that we had all of the Drukhari players playing in Group 4. That ended up just being how the top 16 worked out, so they all got paired together. Ferris and Zweisschneid from Team Firebug, both registering Drukhari for the event and both being in the same group. There were a couple other players who qualified using Drukhari. Valdor from Team Uwu got a lot of his qualifying scores using Drukhari, but elected to switch back to Iron Hands, which is sort of his standard. And we also had Devin Swan from the WTC Canadian team who qualified using Drukhari, but understandably elected to move to Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, inside that Group 4, that meant that the other players in the group were either other Drukhari players, so they were going to be knocking each other out, or they could tech pretty specifically to Drukhari, and we actually saw some very convincing anti-Drukhari lists come out of that. Orcspit playing Death Guard, a Death Guard list featuring a lot of Relic Contemptors, which are very powerful against Drukhari, and Fushini playing, again, Relic Contemptors in an Iron Hands list alongside Redemptor Dreadnoughts and a lot of sort of anti-Drukhari technology. So we actually had all of the Drukhari players knocked out. That said, we did have 2 Adepta Sororitas make it across in Ash C and Ashley Thompson, And this is certainly a faction that if you're not familiar with how they currently play, it is going to be really important to sort of learn the mechanics of Adepta Sororitas. We'll take a quick look at Ashley Thompson's list real quick here, because I think it's a little bit more standard of a build. Ash C's list is a little bit odd, and we'll talk about exactly why momentarily, but Ashley Thompson bringing a battalion detachment out of Argent Shroud that's featuring both Celestine and Morven Val, and protecting those with a bunch of Sacrosants. So a unit of 9 Sacrosants, as well as a unit of 4, and then bringing up the rear with a bunch of Retributors. Now, the benefit of Argent Shroud is that those Retributors are going to be able to advance and fire with those multi-beltas. Both of the Retributor squads have rhinos that they can be put into to protect them on the way in. What we don't see is some technology that did make its appearance in the group stages is Dominion squads in this attachment, which would have given them the ability to pre-game move the Rhino, which actually gives the Retributors a very long threat range. Instead, we're just going to be placing the Retributors in the Rhino. They can bail out 3 inches, and then they can advance and shoot with that Argent Shroud sub-faction trait, so their range with the multi-meltas is still pretty long. That's followed up with an Ebon Chalice detachment, bringing a bunch of Seraphim, as well as Ephriel Stern and Kaiganil. That's due in no small part to the Ebon Chalice stratagem for use with flame weapons, which allows them to increase their range by 4 inches and deal mortal wounds on wound rolls of 4+. So that gives them a little bit of extra damage spike on those Seraphim Handflamers, but it also gives you a lot of infantry clearing, especially if you're looking at going into something like Drukhari or Adeptus Mechanicus that just bring a metric butt ton of toughness 3 infantry. Having all those Handflamers is going to be super useful. That can also help in the Sororitas Mirror as well, which I think both these players were potentially looking at teching for. We also have Ephriel Stern and Kaiganil in that detachment, as well as a second unit of Sacrosants, as well as a Dogmata to make them objective secured. Now, for those who don't know, the Celestian Sacrosants are big units. They do have a Storm Shield, so a 2+ armor save and a 4+ invulnerable save, making them relatively difficult to remove. But their biggest impact on the table typically is the Bodyguard rule, which makes characters within 3 inches of them totally untargetable. It's not just look out, sir. You don't have to be closer. You don't have to have anything else be closer. And you don't even have to have line of sight to the Sacrosant unit in order for it to bodyguard to the character. So a lot of times you'll see the play pattern be to put the Sacrosants behind a piece of obscuring terrain and then have a character 3 inches in front of that piece of obscuring terrain within 3 inches of the Sacrosant unit, which means the character can be like literally leading in the front of your army and your opponent isn't able to target them with ranged attacks. So that makes these, especially multi-model units, which are able to string out, since you can measure that 3 inches to any model in the unit, while being untargetable by shooting attacks. So Morven Val, who has a pretty significant ranged threat, can be very far forward. Celestine is just, very difficult to remove, as well as Ephriel Stern and Kaiganil just being sort of ridiculously efficient, and all of those can't be targeted thanks to those Sacrosants. So in addition to Retributors trying to, chip in some damage and trade for things, this as well as the Seraphim dealing with infantry, the Sacrosants can kind of hold their own in melee as well, but a lot of times you're leaning a lot on those characters to disrupt your opponent's plans and just allow you to sort of gain an attrition advantage. These lists tend to be very aggressive and push very far up the table, and sort of rely on those characters to do a lot of the work, especially in the mid to late game, after their Retributors have committed and shot people with their multi-meltas. Now, moving on to the other Sororitas list in the top 8, we have Ash C, also from Team UU. Both of these players from the same team, a mostly online team that plays a lot on TTS. This one is a little bit more non-standard. This is an Argent Shroud detachment. It's also bringing Celestine and the Gemini, obviously, as well as 6 units of Retribution engines or Redemption engines in that detachment. That's 2 units of 3 Mortifiers, a unit of 3 units of 4 Penitent engines, as well as 1 Retributor squad to allow it to advance and shoot. We also have in a patrol detachment out of Valorous Heart, it's in order to make these Sacrosants a little bit more difficult to kill, a unit of Sacrosants as well as another Mortifier, a Preacher to buff up all those Redemption engines and some Battle Sisters. We have, again, Ephriel Stern and Kaiganil, as well as Morven Val, all in that detachment. The trio of hyper-powered character units being protected by Sacrosants, at least on turn 1, so that allows you to position very far forward, and unless your opponent has not indirect shooting to kill all of the Sacrosants. You do have to kill all of them. It doesn't matter how many are remaining as long as they're still within 3 inches of the character. And then those characters can deploy very aggressively and play very aggressively. The rest of the list plays very aggressively as well. You're going to be advancing and charging with Penitent Engines across the table, and the Mortifiers can follow up and chip in some damage with that massed heavy bolter shooting. So this is very much skewing into these, the Redemption Engine profile, but it's using the same kind of core mechanic of Sacrosants that are buffed up to be difficult to kill or just, sort of relatively numerous to protect these large, powerful character units like Celestine. Now, moving on, I'll talk about some of the other factions that are making their appearance. We do have a list from Fushini, an Iron Hands list. This is a list that Fushini's been really iterating on pretty nonstop over the last season or two, and he's really homed it to kind of a knife's edge. This is probably one of, if not the most effective style of Space Marine list I think that's available in the metagame right now, and certainly has some room for improvement depending on the metagame you're going into. But one of the benefits of Iron Hands is that a lot of their buffs are very flexible. And this list is designed to make use of their ability to buff damage output and survivability in basically every arena of the game. So it's a patrol plus a Vanguard detachment, the patrol bringing a Tech Marine with target protocols, an Infiltrator squad, a unit of company veterans, which are important, as well as a Redemptor squad, a Devastator squad with 3 Grav cannons and a Multi-Melta, has 1 Eliminator squad, 1 Drop Pod, 1 Landspeeder Storm. And this is sort of splits the important units out of this list into 2, because the Vanguard detachment from the same chapter brings a Lieutenant with Rites of War and Voxa Spiritum, so it's a big Lieutenant and Rites of War aura, a second Redemptor Dreadnought, as well as a Relic Contemptor Dreadnought. A lot of the synergies of this list are kind of split between the 2. We do also have a second Devastator squad to go inside that drop pod. So we have a Devastator drop pod with 2 squads in it. We also have that the 2 Redemptor Dreadnoughts being supported by the Tech Marine, and then we also are using basically the same synergy that we just talked about in the Sororitas lists. We're using the Relic Contemptor Dreadnought with March of the Ancients to be upgraded to a character, and we're going to put him in front of these 2 company veterans who have the bodyguard rule, who are going to stand behind a wall and make that Dreadnought entirely unshootable, unless you have indirect fire to deal with the 2 company veterans. And this Relic Contemptor is certainly the single most powerful Relic Contemptor. You can't really do this to multiple Contemptors in an Iron Hands list, so it's not quite as powerful as like multiple ones being buffed with Tollkeeper and Death Guard, for example. But it is definitely the best Volkite Contemptor that I think we have in the game. It is a character, so it's entirely untargetable as long as it's being bodyguarded, and it can be lookout sirred. The downside there is that it also doesn't lookout sir for the other characters in the list, which sometimes, especially if you're losing on attrition, can be a little bit awkward. It does have the Cyclone Missile Launcher, but it's also been upgraded to have Merciless Logic, which is exploding 6s on attacks. So when you roll a 6 to hit, you make an additional attack with that weapon, and that's not limited to the fight phase. So you can do that also in the shooting phase as well, which is important because the twin Volkite Culverins fire a total of 16 shots. So that's a lot of shots. With the Awaken the Machine Spirits from the Primaris Tech Marine, you're hitting on 2s. As long as you're in Devastator Doctrine, which you can do with Methodical Destruction, you reroll 1s, and then when you go to deal damage, you can use Mercy as weakness on the target you're shooting at, and your 6s will deal mortal wounds and then explode into an additional automatic wound. Those wounds are all AP1 from the Volkites because you are set back to Devastator Doctrine. And then you also have the Cyclone Missile Launchers as well, with potentially that target protocols reroll from the Primaris Tech Marine on top of that, which means you get to roll a hit roll, a wound roll, and a damage roll, which is important for those D6 damage weapons. So the absolute damage output of this Relic Contemptor is astronomical. It's insane. When you see it go off and it rolls, it has an insane spike potential because you roll a bunch of 6s. Those explode into additional attacks. Those could explode into additional wounds with Mercy as weakness. And this thing can take down units several times its point cost in a single shooting phase, which is pretty impressive when it ends up happening. Even more impressive because it is untargetable, so it gets to do that multiple times as long as you can keep sort of feeding CP into the combo. We also have a lot of very fast units, and these combo with the Successor Chapter selection. We've elected to take Born Heroes and Whirlwind of Rage in a Successor Chapter, so they get +1 to hit when they charge and exploding 6s. This means that if you get a reroll 1's aura, which you can do off of Wisdom of the Ancients on one of the Redemptors, then they oftentimes, I mean, it's sort of the same arithmetic that they get from the Relic Contemptors, is that hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s with explosions means you convert more attacks than you start with, typically. And you can also use All Mercy as weakness in the fight phase, and with Lightning Claws on the Vanguard veterans, they're rerolling all their wound rolls, which means you get, another 50 or 60% chance to generate additional wounds with that Mercy as weakness ability. So you're dealing a ridiculous amount of damage with these Vanguard veteran squads swinging in. We also have a couple of Eliminator squads to perform actions and screen out the backline, stuff like that. We actually have an Assault squad to do the same thing. This is just sort of a utility unit that can run up and be annoying early game. It's a little expensive for a utility unit, but a lot of the power of the list is just a pure threat overload early. You're going to launch 3 units of Vanguard veterans and an Assault squad and 2 Devastator squads in your opponent's face. And if they can't deal with all of that while being hit by the Redemptor and Contemptor shooting, they just immediately lose the game, basically. Some armies can deal with it and can push through, and if they can, then you have things like, Reject the Flesh, Embrace the Machine to make, keep your guys around a little bit longer, especially now that Drukhari don't have access to Dark Technomancer liquefiers anymore. The profiles that scythe through styles of lists like this are not very prevalent in the meta. So it is a list, that is very annoying to deal with and will back up that annoyance with just this incredible amount of firepower. Very powerful style of Iron Hands list, and that actually got our number 6 player here, Slightly Disappointing Salad, into the top 8 as well, who played a very similar list, but elected to move that to Adeptus Mechanicus. We also have Orc Spit coming in with Death Guard. And if you've been looking at Death Guard lists at all recently, then I think you'll see a lot of similarities with a lot of them. Orcspit, I know, has been playing basically the same list since the Codex released and has had great success with it, clearly, making it to the top 8 here. He's bringing 2 Chaos Contemptors with the Volkite Culverins, and those are being buffed by a Tallyman who gets upgraded with the Tollkeeper. That gives them exploding 6s in the shooting phase, and he can make 1 hit on 2s. He also has a Death Guard Chaos Lord to sit back with them and give them reroll 1s to hit, which means that these 2 Chaos Contemptors, they get a lot of support, but they're also an immense amount of the firepower of this list. There's also 2 Plagueburst Crawlers hiding in the back of the list, as well as 2 units of Death Shroud Terminators to sort of move up the table. And all of that is kind of being given cover by the great fetid wings of Mortarion, who just, gets Miasma Pestilence on him and runs up the table and eats all of your opponent's shooting for a turn or 2. Sometimes your opponent doesn't kill him and he single-handedly wins the game. Sometimes they do kill him, but oftentimes they don't kill him quickly enough, and that allows the Contemptor Dreadnoughts and the Plagueburst Crawlers to deal enough damage that you're able to push through and win on primary objective. This is sort of a very standard style of Death Guard, but a very powerful archetype, and one of the reasons the Death Guard is at least a top 5 faction right now. Two Soul playing an Adeptus Custodes list, relatively standard Adeptus Custodes out of Shadowkeepers, bringing a Venatari unit, a unit of Aquilon Terminators, a unit of Storm Shield Custodians, and Sagittarum Custodians, backing that up with a single Telemon as well as a Caladius Grav Tank. The Caladius is, I think, becoming a more common pick now that Custodes especially have to deal with sort of big infantry blobs, especially the twin Iliastus Caladius, which we don't see here, but we did see multiple players bring into the top 16 of the event. Has a really good profile against those toughness 3 infantry and especially toughness 6 vehicles, which is a really big deal right now. Drukhari Raiders are toughness 6, Iron Strider Ballastarii are toughness 6, and you have to be able to deal with lots of those very quickly. So having 1 or more Caladius Grav Tanks in your army can really help you in those matchups, because having that high volume Strength 6 and Strength 7 shooting, and especially with the Iliastus Accelerator, those go to 2 damage shots at AP 3, meaning that unless an Iron Strider has an armor save buff, either Shroud Psalm being active thanks to Mars, or the +1 save buff from the Doctrina Imperative, then they're going to be just bounced up on their Bionics invulnerable save, and only every 3 failed 6+ invulnerable save means that you've lost an entire Iron Strider. So the Caladius, oftentimes, if it converts 100% of its attacks, which they often do because they're being backed up by Trajan Valoris, who rerolls their 1s to hit and wound, then you can usually pretty reliably knock 2 Iron Striders out, plus chip additional damage in with the Strength 6 weapon on top of that. So moving on, I think the most interesting and most dark horsey list, I think, from the event so far is Jonathan here bringing Mixed Aeldari. And this is a mix of Craftworld's Eldari alongside Harlequins. Jonathan's been grinding Aeldari, basically, I think almost entirely non-Drukhari Eldari for the entirety of the season. So he's definitely done a good job to keep Harlequins relevant and also put the work in to make Craft Worlds do well as well. And Jonathan really leaning on the power of Eldari indirect fire right now. Aeldari have a lot of really good options for non-line of sight shooting, and especially with comboing the Expert Crafters and Masterful Shots abilities. So even if your opponent's hiding in, in or behind a piece of terrain that would block line of sight to them, and are in cover, the Masterful Shots will ignore that. That's really good for all the low AP weapons that Aeldari tend to have. And we are seeing that here with 3 Night Spinners, as well as a unit of Dark Reapers with a Tempest Launcher. So the 3 Night Spinners plus the Dark Reaper is a total of 4 non-line of sight weapons. All of them are relatively high volume. All of them are decent strength and can be high AP. If the Night Spinners get their rending rolls off, then they can be relatively good AP. And a lot of the impetus behind taking these style of weapons is to deal with those Sacrosants that we talked about in the Sororitas lists. They're not too bad against Adeptus Mechanicus profiles either, because AP ignoring doesn't do much to them. Especially the Night Spinners don't have any EP value to speak of anyway. They are blast weapons, so against large Skitarii units, you just max your shots, which is pretty phenomenal. And they are, at least the Night Spinner shots are strength 7, which means they're good at killing Iron Strider Ballastarii. In addition, the Dark Reapers can, hide behind a building, pop out. They have a really long range, and they can tag those Iron Striders and shoot them down with the Reaper launchers, and then fire and fade to get back behind a building and hide. So a lot of very specific counter tech to the metagame in this list, and that is one of the benefits of knowing you're going to be going into these super powerhouse factions in the bracket stage. We also have a bunch of Vibro Cannons because they all Vehicle Squadron to split up, so they all each individually get Expert Crafters rerolls, can be super high efficiency ranged weapons at a very long range as well. And then moving in, the front line of the list is being made out of Harlequin players. So we have a Frozen Stars detachment, so Hysterical Fury to give them +1 attack when they charge. We have a Choreographer of War Troopmaster with the Harlequin's Blade, who's going to be upgraded with Darkness Bite, probably to deal mortal wounds when he attacks, and be given the Twilight Fang Relic as well. So a 2 damage weapon alongside that Choreographer of War that's going to reroll its wound rolls. Comes in a very high AP. I think it's AP 3, and on top of that gets additional attacks as the game goes on. So the later you commit that Troopmaster, the more of those rerolling attacks you could potentially be getting out. And that guy is an absolute monster by himself. We have, whichever one is the Warlord is probably going to be the player of the Twilight to let you regen CP. That's backed up by 4 units of troops alongside a Death Jester and 4 Star Weavers. One piece of technology that we often see upgraded with that Death Jester is giving it Shegarak's Lament, I believe, is the name of the relic weapon, which is basically the same Shuriken cannon that he has, but it becomes AP 3. And then if you give him the pivotal role for Harvester of Torment, every time he's shooting infantry, at least, he triplicates his attacks. So every attack that hits turns into 3 hits instead of 1, which means he could potentially, hitting on 2s, which is fairly reliable, be dealing 9 hits to a unit with a high AP value. So that guy actually chews through a lot of that light infantry that we're talking about. Sororitas infantry, Adeptus Mechanicus infantry, Drukhari infantry, all that stuff gets destroyed by that one Death Jester combo. You can't really bring too many of them. In large numbers, they kind of lose their effectiveness, but at least having that one guy be hanging out in a Star Weaver and just, as soon as you drop a transport or you're able to get a line of sight or in range to one of those important units, just rip half of it off the table with one shooting activation is pretty good, especially since you're going to be hammering all of it with these Night Spinners all game. So really nice to see Craft Worlds putting some work in. They've always kind of been right at the edges of competitive viability, and we do have one in the top 8 here. Now, last but certainly not least, I wanted to save probably the best for last. We have Adeptus Mechanicus in our 4 and 6 spots from Devon Swan and Disappointing Salad. And both of these lists, I think, are going to be relatively standard Mechanicus builds. I think the optimal build of Mechanicus is pretty obvious at this point, now that we are a week or 2 into competitive Mechanicus play. But this faction is of superlative power level. It is the faction to beat right now, and its win rate is certainly showing that it is super duper powerful. We may see some rules changes to Mechanicus in the future to tone them down, I think. I would hope. hope. But right now, I think they are the favorite to win the event, and basically any event that they go to in the not-too-distant future. Devin's list here is being split between Lucius and Mars. He's bringing a Scutarius Marshal with Exemplar's Eternity, so that's going to give rerolls of 1 to hit to Scutarii within 6 inches of him, in addition to the reroll ones to wound he already gives them. On top of that, he has Programmed Retreat to allow you to fall back and shoot, so even engaging into this army doesn't really do you any good. We also have a Tech Priest Manipulus with the Solar Flare, so he's going to be able to pick up a unit within 6 inches and place them wholly within 6 inches of himself anywhere on the table outside 9 of enemies. So typically the combo that you'll use with that is to pick up a unit of Scutarii Vanguards, you go through your command phase, dump all the buffs on them. At the end of your movement phase, you pick them up off the table with that Manipulus, with that Solar Flare, and place them somewhere else on the table where they have good lines of fire to whatever is important to your opponent. You can give them plus 9 inches of range between the Forge World Lucius subfaction trait and the Manipulus extending their range, meaning the short range of their weapons goes up to 27 inches, and 20 Scutarii Vanguard shooting 3 shots apiece with the Radium Carbine fires 60 shots. They use enriched rounds if they're not shooting at a vehicle to automatically wound their target on hit rolls of 4, which means on average you should get between 30 and 35 wounds after your hit roll, since you're probably going to be re-rolling your ones to hit. And then you get to re-roll the rest of those, the other 25 or so attacks, and try to wound those normally as well. So often a Scutarii Vanguard unit averages throwing somewhere 40 to 45 armor saves on their opponents. So that's pretty good. That's all AP 1 currently. So it's not super high AP, and the base strength of the weapons is low, but the enriched rounds is able to put out an immense amount of damage. But you still have to worry about the damage output coming out of the Scutarii Rangers as well, because you could just as easily, if you're shooting at a vehicle or something that's not going to be resilient to that enriched rounds combo, you can use the Scutarii Rangers, buff their AP up to 2. You can get them up to a 39-inch range, which means that when you use the Galvanic Volley Fire stratagem on them to turn their weapons into Rapid Fire 2 weapons, they'll get 4 shots apiece out to 19.5 inches. So you have a lot of flexibility when you're choosing the unit that you want to send, directly into combat and force your opponent to deal with. You also have luminescent blessings on that Manipulus as well, so that's going to make one of those Scutarii units essentially transhuman, only being wounded on a 4+. So whichever unit you're sending into your opponent's lines are going to be very difficult for them to deal with. 20 bodies, all being transhuman, all with some level of AP ignoring, thanks to the Lucius ability, is pretty good. You also, because they're Lucius, have the ability to just deep strike them normally with a 1 CP stratagem. So you can have sort of multiple layers of between the Solar Flare, which could trigger on turn 1, going into these ranger units coming in turn 2 or 3. You have a lot of these rangers, of these Scutarii units that you can just flood the center of the table with, and your opponent has very little counterplay unless they have things like infiltrators or forward deployers. They can't really screen it out, and even if they do, oftentimes your range is so long that you can still get shots into whatever you want. We also have the Mars detachment, bringing a bunch of Iron Strider Ballistarii with a Marshal to give reroll 1s to wound. The Mars sub-faction trait gives all of the Iron Striders access to Canticles of the Omnissiah, and also gives them that Master Artisan's hit rerolls. So they're all very super duper high accuracy Cognos Las cannons that hit for D3 plus 3 damage, 2 shots apiece. One of them, unfortunately, is missing it. So you have 9 Cognos Las cannons, so 18 D3 plus 3 damage shots. Sort of far and above the maximum number of Dark Lances we ever saw in a Drukhari army, and we complained enough about those. But the Iron Striders, you just get more of them for cheaper, so that's pretty handy. And because they benefit from dogmas, they can easily get access to reroll 1s to hit, or a Death Skull style reroll, so reroll a hit roll, wound roll, and a damage roll during their activation, their shooting activation. We also have some additional reserve play with the Terrax Pattern Termite with Corpuscarii to go inside. The Corpuscarii are just a really phenomenal unit. Pretty good at fighting. They also have access to a Fight Last stratagem, which is pretty powerful, and can shoot pretty well as well, especially in conjunction with the Canticle buffs they can get. So I think this is pretty standard for an Adeptus Mechanicus list that you're going to see, and slightly disappointing Salad taking something similar, a Lucius detachment followed up by a Mars detachment filled with those Iron Striders. He's elected to take some Terraxii to act as some additional reserves to come in, and a little bit more of a utility unit, as well as a Fusilier and 2 Stratoraptors to add a little bit of Alpha Strike potential. This list also bringing some Sicarian Infiltrators, so it has a little bit more frontline presence on the first turn. You can also use Circuitous Assassins to pull them off the table once they're near a table edge and redeploy them. So if you want to, that gives you access to some additional secondary objectives. Things like retrieve Octaria's data or engage on all fronts are very easy for a list like this to score, especially in conjunction with those airplanes that are going to be getting those maneuver-style secondaries very quickly. But anyway, that's it for all of the top 8 lists from the T5S2 Invitational. Again, I want to reiterate one more time, we're going to be streaming it at twitch.tv/TacticalTortoiseTV all weekend. So if you want to watch some really high-level games of competitive 40k using these cutting-edge meta armies, come on, hang out, root for your favorites. And we're also giving away some GW gift cards and things like that over the course of the weekend as well. So would love it if you would come chill out with us, watch some 40k. It's going to be sweet. Also, remember to check out the Tactical Tortoise TV YouTube channel. There's a link down below the video for that. That has all of the replays for all of the games that have been streamed for Season 2 of the T5S2 series, as well as Season 3 and the Season 3 Invitational. So if you've missed any games, you can go check them out there, and I hope you drop a sub over there. Anyway, big thanks to watching this video. Hope this enlightened you a little bit, gave you some insight into the cutting edge of competitive 40k lists, and I hope you elect to come hang out on stream with me. So, cheers!